Hello everyone, some of you have asked me about the recent movie Napoleon by Ridley Scott, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby. And so here I am, given that I normally don't follow the trail. That's something I say every time, but it's obvious that, given that the movie has come out in theaters recently, I just will hopefully, follow at least the trail of let's say the portents of views of algorithm and stuff, right? And this is not going to be a conventional movie review because I think that this is a bit of me. I usually disagree with the majority opinion, let's say, and I've seen around like on YouTube suggested in the last week or so. After the movie came out, basically only negative reviews. And I got fascinated with that, right? Because we're always complaining that, YouTube is also not just the best place where you can find historically reliable information. And let's say we have, generally speaking, a problem with the average. Well, why is that? All of a sudden, this movie was disliked. Of course, I'm also, as you know, because this is not the first movie review I make. It's not, a type of video that I make frequently. I mean, just other reviews, but mostly books. Anyhow, movies are important, and they're important in my life. And one thing I always say regarding these, especially about historical accuracy, is that I think movies should always be considered for their artistic value, right? As a historian, I don't watch a movie saying, well, this is going to be a bad movie because essentially what is portrayed is historically inaccurate, right? I push this far I can, actually myself, because there are certain artistic renditions that, in my opinion, are pretty poor because they are in part historically inaccurate, right? And there is no doubt that in this movie there are lots of historical inaccuracies, that generally speaking, this is not, let's say, even documentaries to some degree are more relevant that some historical, say, information is provided with here. I also normally say that the movies I like the most are the ones that I end up rewatching multiple times. I watched Napoleon today just for making this video, and I don't feel like I want to watch the movie again. Right, there are other movies that are so-so, but have something that, I don't know, you particularly like, etc. This one is, okay, you've seen it once, you don't need to rewatch it, right? It's just like Nothing New on the Western Front that I reviewed this year, but it was from last year. Like, I watched it, I realized what it was, I didn't like it, and I voiced the reasons why I didn't like it. Looking at all the negative press on Napoleon, that, when you say, if you check on YouTube, actually will see sort of more honest, right, more reliable information. If you Google that, you will find this thing, they never say it outright, it's a major flop, right? Generally speaking, the top finds when you search it in the engine, it will say, well, it's being criticized but praised by someone else, etc. And so they try to balance the thing out. So, again, I've remained somehow apathetic towards this movie. This is, I think, what most people have been disappointed by, that this is a movie that you get from a director that it's not that I particularly like from a personal point of view. Actually don't, right? But that has definitely made some of the greatest movies of the last decades, and that in this sort of major historical drama picture, independently, again, not from the say the historicity of it, but from Gladiator, from Black Hawk Down, from The Duelists, by the way, which is set in the same historical era, etc. You would expect, many others, by the way, just to stick, think about Alien, Blade Runner, whatever. Those, for example, that genre I don't like that much at all. I'm not a fan. I don't care. But and it's not even just because of historical interest over these other ones. I study history my life because I like to make sense of things. So, but again, if somebody even Ridley Scott makes this movie about Napoleon, it's not this much in terms of historicity. I'm not going to whine over it, right? So this is not actually what this video is specifically about. I want to make it different because otherwise I will just add up on the pile of people who said, this movie sucks, fundamentally. I think, first of all, it's just more complex than that, right? It's not to just find the stuff that you like or dislike in this movie, but just sort of the impression. I think movies and art in general is like that. Either you feel it or not. That's a pretty good indicator of whether that's good art or not, right? So we can, of course, and we will criticize different aspects of the movie also in terms of historical accuracy, etc. But I'm not going to make the entire list of, especially all the political sort of characterial inaccuracies. More than else, what is missed, right? Because this is known by anybody who has essentially listened to any review, like that. There are huge chunks of Napoleonic history and warfare crossed out, right? Here we don't have basically Italy. We don't have the Battle of the Nations. We don't have Spain. We don't have Wagram. We don't have Eylau. We don't have Jena-Auerstaedt. We don't have Friedland. We don't have the defense of France, and much more, right? So I made some videos about Napoleon, including the War of the Third Coalition, the Egyptian expedition. So we'll come back talking about Napoleonic warfare more in depth. And if you want to check how I deal with that, of course, there is a pretty hefty Napoleonic warfare playlist that I plan, again, hopefully to replenish on a regular basis, right? So I'm not going to whine over the fact that some of these topics are not even hinted at, right? For example, Italy is hinted at different times, actually twice or thrice in the movie. There is no talk of Trafalgar. Just we are at this level, right? We talk about boats at some point, but there is no deeper political. This is what you have to absolutely expect, and I presume if you're interested in the reviews, you already know by this time. This is not really, say, a relevant political strategic assessment of Napoleon's capacity in the guise of a historical drama, say, movie, right? Fiction, again, based on actual facts, but still dismissed also by Scott in sort of weird way. Like, were you there to say this is not how? Well, of course, it's a provocation. Right? It's not that dumb. But I want to reflect on this. There is a lot of, say, that the most comparative point I can make is with Gladiator, right? That was never meant to be a historical movie, not even accurate in a military sense, but at least was artistically, I think, a great movie. And we will make the comparison, not just because of Phoenix, but because of just the general. Here we're talking emperors, we're talking wars, we're talking, serious stuff. So that battles, etc. So there is an easy comparison there, in spite of the different era, right? What I would like to point out mostly in this video is how, again, it doesn't make much sense to expect from, I think, anyone, especially at this point in movie making, to make a film that you can't be satisfied with in terms of historical, say, accuracy would even be too far, because I believe that doesn't make any sense to watch movies to actually appreciate historical accuracy. That's not where you should look at. It's something I'm being very clear about. I, for example, think that Oliver Stone's Alexander is a terrible movie in terms of military historical accuracy. But in the very ABC of it, I know lots of people get the hype of that, like they could get with Gladiator or whatever. But let's say, and people usually even credit the director there to have this dramatic sort of insight of military stuff, of combat, whatever. That's actually not the case, right? And the impression I got watching the movie, which is, by the way, 2.5 hours long, by the way, is, first of all, on this note, I would say it's positive in itself. I think that the movie does flow, right? I don't think that this is the most important thing ever, but albeit you can say that there is not much of a tension mounting. It can be even boring. And in fact, again, I'm not personally going to rewatch it. The general sort of compression of events, given that this thing starts from literally, the time of Marie Antoinette's beheading to essentially Napoleon's death, is terrible in terms of what is cut out, again, historically, but it kind of says, oh, well, I know the story and I can't follow this, and it goes so fast forward in terms of connections, because they don't show them, that it sort of feels as if the movie was shorter, as a matter of fact, right? And of course, I'm very analytical when I watch these movies, also because I have to report to you eventually what I think of them. But I gotta give this, that there is a sort of flowing rhythm. It can be boring, whatever, but it kind of works. And part of the reason why it does, which again is not a merit for the movie in particular in this sense, we'll get into the historical stuff now, but is the fact that the basis of this movie is evidently and notoriously, as you could get from the trailer, by the way, where you can still see basically the most acutely emotional moments, right? It never raises above that sort of level of tension, right? What you see about Austerlitz, yes, it's that bad, first of all, in strictly historical terms, but it's also the top sort of level of tension you can get from the movie whatsoever. But this movie is essentially a love story, right? It really talks about Napoleon and Josephine de Beauharnais. That's pretty much it. It's based on the characters, on their relation, also after her death, and basically the entire narrative is intertwined on this motive, right? And it's a choice that you gotta respect, right? Because for whichever reason they decided to make this, at least they've stuck to that. So they haven't sort of flown. Say, you can understand better, like that. I understood the criticism there of the movie to be partially unfair, because if this had been literally a political history of Napoleon, it would have been an utter disaster. This is just like a poorly made, a poorly sort of crammed together a movie that, however, has as the trait d'union the relationship between Napoleon and Josephine. That's basically it, right? And all the rest follows. It's just, let's say, told in an eventfully important way, right? The events of the various wars and battles and political events are relevant, but fundamentally it gets down still to what are these two up to. And regarding to the love story, I must say that I've read, I'd say a lot, or at least I've heard something here about the sort of twisted nature of this relationship just per se. But if you look at them, at the end of the day, the movie at least left me with a sense that they were nice, right? Other sort of game was played, because especially at the beginning there is betrayal, whatever, but the rest of the movie sort of flows normally. They seem to care about each other, and they're two great actors, and they really express at the end of the day successfully this connection between the two. There is no sort of plot twist about what they feel towards one another around the last 2/3 of the movie, so it's all rather comforting in a way. It's as if when Napoleon dies, he goes to Josephine that is calling him. And of course, I'm going to spoiler, but I can't. This movie can't be spoiled without any sort of moral, let's say, any sense of guilt for the listener. And albeit there are some aspects, of course, of this relationship and the story also that is ridiculous per se. Also on a historical basis, and just getting the basics. I don't know, Josephine was notoriously older than Napoleon, but the movie depicts it different. But again, this is fiction, right? It's a depiction of that, and yes, these were clamorously important figures, and we all sort of know about them, about their context. But of course, this is a movie, and it's just approximated, and they wanted to show it like this for this reason. It made it seem worse. It made it less enjoyable. Well, okay, it was their choice. They get what they get. Poor reviews, whatever. But let them be, right? I didn't feel particularly negative towards the story. But by the way, this is particularly important. One thing I appreciate this movie for is the fact that there is no ideological sort of angst in it, right? We do not see gender theory. We do not see critical race theory. This is a huge deal. This is a major historical drama movie that of 2023 that literally doesn't give a damn about that sort of race, sex card. I say sex because it would be gender, but to me there is no such thing like gender, just sex. And the thing could easily escalate toward that direction because, especially of the relationship. So I thought, well, this may be the usual, strange sort of baiting thing for, especially from the trailer, when Josephine tells Napoleon that without her he would be nothing, which would be sort of politically and historically sensible, because that's in many ways also why Napoleon came to power, thanks to her favors notoriously. So that would have been a very important key card if some crazy feminist would have had to blow the whole thing. But no, they don't play that, and you gotta give it to the makers here. And the same goes for, there is basically no reference to race. There is no sort of the Mamluks make a very poor scene. The entire basically scene on Egypt is, there's nothing, right? Just it's the Battle of the Pyramids. You see, before the battle, the French shoot. The enemy commander falls from a horse, and this is the entire thing we see about. And it stops, right? There is no battle. You don't see that. I mean, there is the battle, but they don't show you because it's meant at that point to be that irrelevant. So any sort of racial reference here is frankly innocent. There is nothing sort of malicious in that regard. And again, I think this is a big plus in a way. Now, there is another aspect about Napoleon that you can get as a character that you can't get a bit from the trailer. The trailer was, in my opinion, sort of providing you, especially with sort of contemporary music and sort of badass, sort of psycho mode state, say, depiction of Napoleon in the trailer as, oh my god, this is the typical movie that wants to show Napoleon, depict Napoleon like a bloodthirsty motherfucker that has psychological problems, etc. And you go watching the movies essentially expecting that. And I must say that, in spite of the fact there are some aspects about his personality that are sort of strange, the movie's not really about that at all, right? Nor he actually displays that sort of psycho attitude, right? And that's another thing that, albeit I'd say the general Frenchness of this, say, of the historical context is not developed. This is easily a sort of Anglo-Saxon perspective of Napoleon in a way, right? Not completely, and here I will also try to observe some aspect, but you can feel it. You can feel it in Scott. You can feel it in Scarpa. That is an American. This the guy who wrote the script, and in general, yes, there is not. I know that there's been problem with the French press when interviewing Scott that was apparently rude to them, because I don't know what they were asking him, but they were sort of saying, this was Napoleon. You could make something a bit more, let's say, reflective on, I don't know, his political, civil, and also, of course, military accomplishment in a bit more of an accurate way. But I don't think that that's even something you must just get from the movie. I mean, if they wanted to make it like that, let them make it like that. And if you don't like it, find somebody else that makes the movie that you would like to. Again, I don't think that this movie in particular is going to make people dumber or more ignorant than they already are in terms of historical knowledge. And this is actually the problem I have with this all, that I think that also, since I think that aside from movies, YouTube is the only place where people get anything today from history in an explained way by someone, right, or rendered way by someone, because people, generally speaking, don't read much books or whatever. I think that, yes, of course, on here in particular, you can find sort of more in-depth stuff, etc., but people do not, evidently, they're not particularly interested in the historical accuracy in general, right? So all this aggression towards the movie, I get it if you felt disappointed because you thought this to be something like so cool, like Gladiator or whatever. I get it, but if I've seen a lot of historical criticism, and I don't think that this movie was setting you up for that in any way. You could immediately see it from trailer, right? Of course, the trailer is not the movie, but and you can judge only after you watch the movie. But fundamentally, I mean, in a more comprehensive way. But at the end of the day, again, I don't think that this movie is the problem. I think the broader problem is how the movie industry works nowadays, how incredibly bad movie making really is, and there is a broader moral, cultural reason for it that we will appreciate later. Right? We live in our times. The times of Gladiator were a moment in which the West believed in itself in a very strong, powerful way. Right? It's before 9/11, if I'm correct. We're in 2023. Right? We have a completely different mindset, and this sort of exhaustion and tiredness that sort of emerges in this almost decadentistic rendition of Napoleon's figure. And reviews have also highlighted how Napoleon is... by the way, consider I watched this in my native language, so I have listened to some part of the movie in English, and the way Phoenix speaks is a bit more pathetic, objectively, than in my language, in the way it was dubbed. So I could have gotten, in that sense, a different impression of his character, right? I personally found the character pathetic for Napoleon's standards, right? This guy is evidently not Napoleon from what we get from his diaries, from his memoir, from the general historical recording that we have about his personality, his behavior. He was a much more sort of straightforward, energetic, and restless, assertive, of course, heavily, this guy had one of the strongest minds, of course, his own time. It could have not been otherwise at those levels of command, etc. So none of this is showed, right? And I understand, however, that in movie renditions, it's very difficult to even begin to talk about that, right? If you look at Auerstaedt in that, I think it's a 1970 movie, that's brilliant, about Waterloo. We will talk about the battle as well. That's obviously a sort of masterpiece in comparison to the 2023 one. In many ways, but again, that's about a battle. This is about the entire, say, the rise and fall of Napoleon, we could say. So that, let's say, watching the movie, like, not expecting this to be anywhere near to a historically accurate rendition of Napoleon's character, I didn't really feel that the character, that Phoenix, the entire, like, how it came out, was really a pathetic character, right? There are some less edifying aspects. There are the sex scenes that are somehow very vulgar, but again, they decided to insert them in that sort of showing even the highs and lows of Napoleon and Josephine's relation. If you want, even the human nature in intimacy, etc. But I didn't find him more, say that pathetic, right? It's rather a sort of dull, plain character that actually does have something going on, because at least in the events that succeed themselves, I mean, some of the most devastating in the entire history of mankind up to that point, of course, you understand, or you can imagine how this guy is concerned, right? Just having the historical background, what was going on. In fact, it doesn't talk much. The way we do not get to know too much about this character doesn't, however, take fully away the face of this guy, right? Nor it makes it look as if he was a bad character. I think this is a very important thing, because I've seen reviews saying, well, but this is sort of the Anglo-Saxon version Napoleon, so the monster, the dictator, the tyrant, whatever. Actually, it doesn't ring like that, right? This movie just shows like a guy that is doing this stuff for some reason. You do not even get that much of a political background. You do not know why he's fighting, to some extent, why he got into that specific battle, in which campaign, in which war. That is not really... there was no time unit for that. There are some references, of course, to the broader. There is, there is Talleyrand, there is Metternich, there are various, there is Francis II, there is Alexander I. You, of course, Wellington, etc. You do see these people. There are some other important, but in the movie, say historically important, but in the movie minor characters, right? Also in French politics. Consider that for a 2 hours and a half video, the first 50 minutes are dedicated to Napoleon's rise to power, which I think is, just even in interest of time, a waste of time. There is uneven disproportion based on, which is still incomplete and unsatisfactory, about how he rose to power. It's all very confused and sort of more aimed at showing the sort of the negative side of the French Revolution, but through very basic and sort of non-relevant, it's just customary, vulgar aspects of the French Revolution, rather than the actual political, institutional, or military context of the situation. So you have basically the most important things going on in the Napoleonic era, sort of even more compressed, right? Again, there is no Italy, there is no Italian campaign. That is a big miss. The same Egyptian expedition, there is no reference to Abu Qir, to the entire sort of British Ottomans. Zero. Like, you forget to see any of that. But in general, there are some references here and there to things happening internationally. But again, that's not what the movie is based on. You don't even, it's one of those details in the dialogues that have mostly to do with something else, that really are just a timid way to say, well, we tried to make it sound as if things were going on, just not to be totally, because they knew this would just be a poor rendition, right, of the times and events, right? But I didn't feel that sense of negative stigma here. And don't get me wrong, there is some sort of final tragedy in Napoleon's character, because especially at Waterloo, he ends up being a hypocritical figure, right? He makes this sort of extremely poor motivational speech in front of his army. The entire battle, we will talk about it later, is showed as if, he was just knowing that the Prussians were arriving, but he was an idiot. He wanted to fight anyway, whereas instead, Waterloo is just, war is a gamble just per se, and there were sound strategic reasons for searching confrontation with the British, even though the Prussians were somewhere arriving close. But aside from that, he shouts out something like, we are So you're my brave soldiers of Austerlitz, whatever, and we will never surrender. And then, horrifyingly enough, there is the actual participation of Napoleon to combat in Waterloo, which is, I mean, that tells you that the low end, right, of this movie, right, together with so many inconsistencies we'll look at later on. And then when he is about to be shipped to St. Helena, he, through a dialogue, seems to blame, not necessarily Waterloo, but it's implied there, like to somebody else, right? Napoleon doesn't seem to be particularly torn by, as he actually was, after that bitter day, etc. It's as if he was living on, and then he thinks still to Josephine, and then basically dies, right? So in the end, he looks a bit hypocritical and even cowardly, and or confused in some way. But let's say definitely, the movie doesn't make this guy look like a psycho, right? At the very end of the movie, you do see a list. Actually, I have it here because I have the movie rolling for a reference. There is a reference to the fact that basically under him, or because of him, 3 million people would die, right? He says he led 61 battles in his military career. I'm reading here. And by the way, they're sort of randoms. There is not even Leipzig. This is the entire list. Toulon, Marengo, Austerlitz, Borodino, Waterloo. And then the invasion of Russia. And next to it, there is all the dead. And by the way, Borodino is separated from the invasion of Russia for some reason. Next to Waterloo, you find 47,000 dead in one day. Well, okay, that were also, in that interest of time, bloody engagements, of course, in his career. And so this is actually the only, I think, punchline that is at least relatively designed to claim here. I read between 1793 and 1815, over 3 million people died. Right? He doesn't, let's say, this writing at the end of the movie doesn't actually blame it directly on Napoleon. Right? It doesn't say he started that, he was the bad guy, etc. It's just a sort of, even in this sense, passive reflection. Right? This is not passive-aggressive stuff. It's just saying, consider that all these people died in his battles, and in total, yeah, but it doesn't sound like a j'accuse. It sounds like, rather, consider that this happened, this was this guy, and this was his story. It's basically about Josephine. Right? And so, it doesn't feel like anything, right, really. I really don't get people who get, because there is a lot of debate, and heated one, and sort of interesting, of course, about the, say, who Napoleon was. Was he a positive figure, a negative? People are obsessed with this stuff, right? Like the guys who compare him with Hitler or whatever. And that's a thing that, in fact, is usually done because, of course, especially in the Anglosphere, there was this reaction to Napoleon that was very sort of islander in many ways, and that remained a bit more in pop culture in Anglo-Saxon countries, but I think that the Anglosphere is generally educated to know, in fact, know really lots of people from there that really instead think positively on Napoleon. But it's not necessarily that they have to be right or wrong, it's just how you back that up. Right? I met a lot of people today that back Napoleon because want to make of him a sort of liberal hero because sort of he, I don't know, they don't even quote the actual reforms or the Code Napoleon or why that was actually so important. I made videos about these topics, but because, I don't know, I have no problem with this in general, because, say, I don't know, he couldn't be Hitler because he actually improved the condition of the Jews, right? But that this Jewish punchline, I see it used massively, but any other, which was important enough, but also part of a broader Enlightenment situation. I mean, there were even some Ancien regimes, think about the one of Ulster itself, under Joseph II, they were improving the condition of the Jews, right? That's an interesting and important thing, but there is, first of all, a reason behind that, and secondly, what Napoleon was immense, again, politically, institutionally, juridically, and I think people should be a bit more literate about the actual value of that, right, without necessarily being obsessed about whether Napoleon is a good or a bad guy, which is also not what I'm going to discuss today. Of course, at the end, I will make some considerations, but let's say not along this line, right? So, I think that this Napoleon surely is a poor one, right? It's not much as a bad one, or an evil one. It's a poor one, right? It's just a guy that finds himself in this way. He has evidently ambition. He's not, generally speaking, just always a good person, even throughout the movie. But I don't think that this was the stabbing to Napoleon's picture. I don't think it is. It may have been influenced by the sort of controversial, negative idea that there is in that culture. I think that Scott, it may have actually a negative bias against Napoleon. I don't know, but the movie, in my opinion, does not give specifically that impression. What it really does as a disservice to the Napoleonic era and Napoleon and the French, if you want, the Empire, etc., is that it doesn't show any of the charisma, of the grandeur, any of the, if they wanted to play the card, oh my god, so many people died, well, the movie doesn't do that. There are lots of battles, there is a lot of carnage, but it doesn't insist on that, right? If you look at the 1970 movie, you see there a bit of, again, of British bias, but you also see the brutally harsh sense of loss of human life in large quantities and the tragedy of this all. This movie actually doesn't insist on that at all. Yes, it is violent, but it doesn't focus on, my god, so many people died, right? There are some horrifying, gory things that are designed to make you reflect on death and violence and all this stuff, but there is not the point of, oh my god, the jeunesse dorée was wiped out because Napoleon campaigned, or all the other people suffered there, something. Actually, the movie doesn't seem to give a damn about any nationality, not just about French glory, right? I think the worst stereotypes about, about the French are at the beginning. It's the revolution properly that is shown in very sort of crazy, violent, and vulgar ways. And let's say this movie a movie about Napoleon cannot be about the usual stereotype about the French being some sort of unaware people who find themselves in war and randomly surrender for no reason, evidently. But it sort of buys at the beginning a bit of the sort of brave but creepy French stereotype, right? Which is, of course, a very British or sort of broader Anglosphere thing. That's the impression I received, mostly from the beginning of the movie. Otherwise, if you look actually at the other nationalities portrayed, there is, first of all, very few. Basically about the Austrians and the Prussians, you get nothing, right? There is a depiction of Emperor Francis that seems like a random guy who doesn't understand, or at least an incapable person that simply cheers with Napoleon. Drinks with Napoleon after, because they did meet after Austerlitz. And that seems just like, okay, I find myself in this situation, I've lost, now I have to think about that. But it doesn't absolutely express the sort of Habsburgic tragedy and hatred and sort of sense of disaster that battle had entailed. And that's basically all what you see for the Austrians, a bit maybe Metternich at some, or the guy was supposed to be Metternich, because with the chronology that's not entirely matching. But the Prussians basically are never shown, right? Even at Waterloo, there is no you see them arriving, but you don't see them even in action. I don't think they even bought the Prussian uniforms, because actually there was a lot made in terms of historical costumes, and there are, like, this is typical of Scott's movies. You can see it in Kingdom of Heaven, etc. The details are very detailed. The general picture is sort of messier, but especially in this movie, and I will explain why. The Russians are shown like Alexander I is just a sort of kid that, that doesn't actually render the sense of a Tsarist mentality of the Ancien regime at the beginning of the 19th century. The guy, by the way, was incredibly struck by Napoleon, especially at the beginning. I made a video about Austerlitz explaining that. I thought that it was a guy sent from heaven. They had all that traditional religious actually recognition of Napoleon's power at that point. This is completely not shown, right? Napoleon is just talking with this boy. By the way, when he asks, it's not even Talleyrand, is another guy, I don't remember. He asks Napoleon had already come to power, right? If I'm not wrong, it's just after the imperial crowning. And just imagine, like, of course, the knowledge that Napoleon had about the entire Europe, right? Here, there's nothing about Poland. There is zero, like, about these other things. And he simply asks, as if he started to learn it from the first time of his life, to this official, like how is Alexander I? Like, the basic things. What was its government? What is? Of course, he would have known widely by that time, and that's pretty ridiculous. The British are portrayed in actually a bit the same sort of British stereotype, the benign one, but also a bit ridiculous one that they were able to display in this movie. So again, I don't think that there's not a display of great British quality or bravery or capacity. Wellington is represented in a way that I don't like, but that is at least that sort of cold, silent. It's actually because before that the English aristocracy was not really, it was more pompous, etc. Like, it's with Wellington historically, that sort of quiet, sort of reserved British aristocrat emerges, right, as a model, because of course also of the prestige of Waterloo, etc. But again, there's not even Trafalgar mentioned. There is the siege of Toulon at the beginning, with the British that are assaulted then, and that you don't see that too much of. Let's say this movie wanted to show British bravery instead of the French one. The soldiers are represented all in very neutral fashion. And so I don't see that sort of negative British, say, stereotype against the French or Napoleon as ideologically, right? Waterloo is much more about that. In Waterloo, you find sort of the production winking a bit at the sense that Napoleon is a sort of Hitler / Mussolini of the situation, and Wellington is the true gentleman, and you familiarize with British soldiers that make jokes with the typical sort of, in fact, English humor, and you don't familiarize in the same way with the French. This movie doesn't actually, it said 2023 Napoleon doesn't actually even care at all about this, so it's another sense of the fact that there is sort of neutrality on that ground. I don't think Scott, for any, or Scarpa or whomever, for whichever reason, were particularly loading with bias this movie in a national sense. I don't think so. The general picture can seem like, yes, of course this movie was not meant to glorify Napoleon. If properly the French had done one, it would have been different. By the way, when I was a kid, I used to watch the 2002 Napoleon series, which was a thing that was made by France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and the US, which was a proper series that, of course, could show a bit more some of Napoleon. Of course, it's a bit ridiculous, but it showed more historical stuff because it was a series, right? It wasn't just 2 hours and a half long like the movie. So that I think that many kids of my generation grew up with at least that basic sort of in greater detail about single Napoleonic battles and events. Doesn't matter how just there were, I don't know, 40 soldiers shooting at each other, etc. Napoleon himself was ridiculous. There were so many other Murat, etc. But here, by the way, the thing I didn't notice is there is no sense of generalship here. Like, all the Napoleonic marshals are basically non-existent, right? You don't see them. They don't have any role. And so that immediately tells you from a military point of view how, non-existent, really, the entire military side of the story is. But speaking of nationalities, and concluding also because there are also on the topic, I mean, there aren't other nationalities displayed here. I think the greatest problem is that there is no Frenchness in this movie. Right, again, at the beginning, the movie starts with Ça ira, you have some sort of French music references, etc. But aside from lots of French flags throughout the movie, you do not get any sense of Frenchness whatsoever. Right, they look all like Anglo-American sort of Anglosphere characters, even. Again, the characterists that play the various heads of state, but I don't know their nationality, but some of them they do not give you any sense of Austrianness or Russianness or whatever, right? You see that this is a bit like a masquerade, right? And no Frenchness. Let's still assign that these are, well, okay, it's not a problem. In these movies, they still write for an English reading audience, right? Letters in English, even though they should be in French, etc. But there is no interest in telling this this as a French history, right? The same connection with the soldiers is very, very feeble. Napoleon expressed that, but the movie is about him. It's not about his relation with the soldiers, which is probably one of the worst things for a Napoleon movie, because he was pretty much about that, right? The movie concludes itself with the idea that Napoleon's last words, again, the quote, were France, army, and Josephine. But you don't see much about France. You don't see much about the army. You see a lot about Josephine, which was pretty attractive, and you know, we are thankful for that. But other than that, there isn't much of a... Because, again, the love story, I'm not going to talk so much about that, but, again, I think it's nice overall. It's just you have to watch it to understand it. I don't get a displeased feeling from that love story the way it was rendered in the movie. Yes, historically, it was another thing. These were different characters, etc., but concretely... that's a part that can't even go. But the lack of all the rest, that is truly sort of disconcerting, right? And you can do it with relatively few. You see, this movie, I don't know how much it cost. It's a disproportionate amount of money. It's unbelievable, because many scenes were not CGI, actually. There were scenes with hundreds of people, of actual actors, for battle scenes. That, of course, there was a lot of CGI anyway for replicating, of course, their numbers, etc. But not even with CGI you get the understanding that these were armies of hundreds of thousands of men. Even though when Napoleon plans the Waterloo campaign, he's vocal about that, and of course the body count at the end of the movie is sort of aimed at that in part, but apparently Scott uses some sketches like a comic book, right? Even a colored one to represent the scenes. And in fact, it's pretty adherent to that. If you look at the scenes and the comic books pages, you get the sense that this is like how a 12-year-old me could have conceived Napoleonic warfare. And actually, at the time, I drew comics myself that were much more spectacular and impacting in many ways. In this movie, there is no sense of hardness, of clash of wills, right? I have here the Clausewitzian avatar for one reason, among the others. You you don't get the sense of the order, of the greatness, of the military machine, of finally mass society that unlocked and unleashed hell through that, right? Like in Gladiator, you could argue, thinking of the line, right? This is the same director, and there is a sense of weakness of these armies, right? These soldiers do not maintain any sort of real order. There is no sense of the various divisions. Of course, even less of the corps. These battles are just tactical engagements that last some minute. Even by scale, they're pretty reduced, and there is no sensible order or great interaction between combined arms in a logical, efficient, or sort of historically scholar way. Yes, there are combined arms, but again, in situations that we'll see now, especially Austerlitz, that of course has nothing to do with a Napoleonic battle, but nothing in the movie actually has anything to do, even remotely close to do with that. And we'll explain why. But again, the lack of Frenchness could have been made up for, but just with a few scenes. Like, there are soldiers that appreciate Napoleon, whatever. There is the scene after the escape from Elba in which he was about to get shot by the at least the army sent by the representative king by the Congress of Vienna, where he instead he makes this support shower by the soldiers to join him as the actual event, etc. But other than that, you do not find on the battlefield, like the last stand of the old guard at Waterloo that is showed in the 1970 movie, or in other instances, not even in the retreat of Russia. It's just Napoleon eating something and giving some pieces of his food to randomly passing by soldiers that do not even quite stop in front of him, do not have that light in their eyes because of Napoleon. Like, it's just an incredibly dull sort of depiction of what was perhaps the greatest point about Napoleon. It was his charisma among his troops, and also because of his strategic qualities. They could have showed, I don't know, the 1806 Hegel reference to Napoleon entering Jena, carrying together with him the spirit of history. There's none of that inspiration. There is none of that sort of sense of power that was not just strategical. This enormous armies that the world had never seen before, working like that, and made lots of videos explaining what's the difference, right, from the Ancien Regime into, in fact, the mass era army, the armies of the French Republic and Empire, perfected by Napoleon. None of that, but even less of that sort of enormous sense of, say, moral burden but control, right, that a commander must have. Of course, we live in a society that still thinks in the butcher's myth, right? So you can't really show that a leader actually is the one that carries the entire burden on his shoulders for these enormous things. But again, there is no solemnity in this movie. I would say that also there's no characterization of Paris, there's no characterization of France whatsoever, or the splendor of imperial grandeur. And Napoleon was very scenographic in his self-representation publicly, and that was all a set of higher responsibility, etc. This guy is just, represented at home with Josephine, and not even in the splendid luxurious apartments that you can still find in various residences, etc. No, it's just, a dull, gray, boring sort of context, right? You understand they're rich, but they don't make you understand that these were the actual emperors of France. So that is, I think, particularly disappointing, because even without the millions and millions that this movie cost, and I'm gonna Google that because I heard 400 millions, but it seems like impossible, because that would be a real insult. Movie budget, let's see. Oh my god, like, yeah. I think the break even given to 200 million budget, I don't know, but we are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right, for this actor. Like, you see, this is what I really don't understand. If you have all that money, you can cure detail and even in script, etc., to a degree that doesn't cost you anything, but makes, this is my greatest criticism to historical movies, that gives you the idea, right? After all, you have CGI, you have already paid for all these hundreds of people, you have certain scenes that are remarkably well choreographed, and sort of, especially, you see that there are lots of details in that, right? And that single scene, as meaningless in the entire movie, however, required some work, right? Why didn't you put that into something more comprehensive and qualitative and reasonable and logical and cogent? No, zero, right? This tells you a lot about how movies are made today that are, utter garbage, seriously enough, artistically speaking. And this is not a bad movie to watch overall. There are ships, there are different landscapes, there are different buildings, and you say costumes, etc. It's not costumes, I mean, but again, overall they always keep it low, right? There are multiple scenes, always carriages going back and forth in the same place that just by themselves are a bit irrelevant as scenes, and could have been used to show something else. I mean, they went even over to different countries. They could have shot more scenes in more different scenarios, whatever. They decided not to do this. And I can't even begin to list all the things, of course, that historically were missing. Again, I accept that. I accept that in a 2 hours and a half movie about Napoleon's life as a whole, you cannot quite show that. There is, again, no depth of strategy whatsoever. There is practically no background for the for these battles and campaigns and wars. Like, you kind of have an idea why they were fought, etc. But again, also the national choice there, the European dimension is completely absent in itself. The sort of balance of powers. There's, again, certain nationalities are not even represented at all. You don't have a sense of what's going on, right? You don't have a sense of what's going on, again, in Germany or in Eastern Europe or in Italy or in the Iberian Peninsula. You just have this idea that there are the British, the Austrians, the Russians, and somewhere the Prussians, that of course make up the whole thing, but they're just ideas, right? They're not shown in any consistent. There is no actual. There's a scene on the Congress of Vienna, but it's just this guy sitting at a table, right, all together, and it's sort of absolutely not how it happened practically in the way they're trying to sort out the thing. It's just also childish after all, the way it's explained. There is no sense of solemnity of institutions, like the early 19th century institutions, and exactly because also of the same Napoleonic era, were big, imposant, powerful, rich, sort of visible, tangent, clamorously refined things. So here there is no sense of that power. There is no sense of that, even of hatred towards Napoleon. There's just, at some point at the Congress of Vienna, Wellington saying, this guy is a verminous scum, whatever. But again, even after Austerlitz, you see that Alexander doesn't participate because he's abated by by the defeat. But again, the Austrian emperor that was the guy who had most at stake there, by the way, with his capital occupied and already out of his home, etc. Like this guy seems just like, I don't know, the guy from the shop downstairs. Like, doesn't have any sort of contextualization, characterly speaking. And it's terrifying. It's horrifying. There is no sense of identitary historicity in this movie. Right? Not even Napoleon seems much of a French guy. There's nothing there to tell you what's the difference between him and Commodus and Gladiator. Okay, they're not the same guys, actually, and I would like to stress that, but it's as if Napoleon was a pretext here, right? Now, in a tactical sense, again, things are terrifying as well. This is not a movie conceived to have any historicity about this whatsoever, right? There is a minimal detail. I don't know, the sort of gloomy atmosphere in Austerlitz, which was not even entirely that, right? It was not necessarily a particularly gloomy day, or even that snowy, or cold, to that extent at least. In Waterloo, you do get a minimal sense. At least the British are on a hill, right? And the battle roughly takes place with the same vectors. That as much as you can claim from it. Borodino is just a random scene that they have to insert to you didascally to explain you that it's Borodino, and I don't even remember. I think there's not even properly another battle depicted. It's that objectively bad. There is a scene in which you see. I think it's the Austrian cavalry approaching at Austerlitz, where cavalry maintains a minimal cohesion, where the horsemen are aligned. But basically in any other scene that are looked at, especially during the attack and the charges, nobody maintains cohesion, right? I mean, even in Braveheart, you got something close to, yes, a good alignment, at least of a first line, in a sense of scare of what cavalry could be, even though it's a very high historical movie in many ways, and also really not that tactically, informed. But this one is sort of bad. Like at Waterloo, if I'm not wrong, you see cavalry units, like there is the infantry line of the French, and then behind them there is French cavalry. They pass right through the infantry. This doesn't happen in military history. Doesn't make any sense, and it's just not just dangerous, but you cannot maintain cohesion. You have to stop. The units cannot pass like that, especially when they're meant to be cohesive, not just simply retreating. All right. Now the tactical peak of the movie is Austerlitz, which is essentially the scene they show you, understandably, in the trailer, in which I made a video about Austerlitz, so you can look at it if you're not familiar with the battle, not just at the complexity of it, but especially how wrestled that battle was, right? Remember, the biggest the battle and the more wrestled these were, right? These battles could last hours, days. There was a very specific sense of timing as far as the attrition of the single divisions were concerned. It was a moment, as you know, of quasi-scientific theorization about exactly what was happening here and there in the battlefield. Of course, I'm a Clausewitzian, so I would never actually go like that, but let's say this sense of control of an awareness and reliance and reliability on and reliability of the units, the esprit de corps, the sense of resistance and combativeness, it's completely not there. You do not get anything about, I don't know, the problem of, say, the difference between a veteran and a raw recruit, or maneuvering, whatever. It's all extremely farcesque. Austerlitz is depicted like basically there is a ridge on which Napoleon stands with hidden artillery and troops in a trench, and then there is basically the French camp in the open in front of that, without any just like that. And basically the Austrians, which I think are the only guys depicted in that battle, there aren't the Russians in it. They just simplified the thing, even though the Russians appear, like, of course, with Alexander, etc. But you have the Austrian army basically coming out of a sort of valley, right? A tortuous one, as if it was just an imminent, like there's all this scene with the Napoleonic messengers that they have to communicate to each other that the attack was imminent, as if this massive armies, like what these armies are. Like in the Allied case, in that battle, you may underestimate how many French there are on the other side, but you do know the terrain. There is cartography. People are aware of what is there. Now, it turns out, by the way, that as soon as this valley opens, there is nobody knows which kind of geographical feature in Moravia, for which the entire surface until this ridge is basically just a frozen lake, which is a reference to some ponds that existed on the southern end of the Austerlitz battlefield, where allegedly some soldiers would have drowned, because I don't remember whether the source saying literally that the French shot them when the Allied retreated, and so the ice broke and they drowned in the icy water. But they actually even scoped in the bottom of those ponds. They didn't find anything, but it's just also a minimal sector detail of the battle where nothing actually relevant happened. This, by the way, already during the retreat. And so this has absolutely nothing to do with the magnitude of Austerlitz. It's one of the single most important battles in the history of mankind. And that was battle over with this continuous reverses by sending in reserves. And it was one of the typical war, say, Napoleonic battles of attrition, but with some, the charges of the cuirassiers of the French, the Russian was, again, one of the single most brutally and traumatically violent episodes in the entire history of mankind, right? Levels of brutality that this movie doesn't minimally represent, right? Because it doesn't actually understand the sense of mass and moral force and impact, right? And traumatic brutality here against cavalry. Again, cavalry charges are just this horsemen jumping around, right, and doing solo feats, and not maintaining cohesion, not having to do anything, knowing nothing about what a cavalry charge is supposed to be in any historical situation. And so there is zero there. And the story is that nobody knows, again, what this immense lake would have been, frozen, and this army walking on it without knowing it, right? And by the way, it would take, like, I don't know, Siberian winter, like minus 30 degrees below zero, to freeze this entire mass of water, to the point even that nobody would even understand that we're walking on ice because there is no on. It's not even a child buys this, right? This was one of the most painfully stupid things that the movie could ever do. And basically the battle works like this, that the French in the camp were just sort of the bait. But it's a huge camp, right? That also is all that square. There is no internal distribution of the soldiers. It's just this sense that even in other scenes of the movie, the soldiers just fight as it happens, without much of a formation or whatever. Just in Waterloo, you see something more like a musketry fire exchange, but in a cohesive formation, everything degenerates into a sort of brawl in the end. That, of course, also has nothing to do with what actually happened on a regular basis. And so the entire concept, again, of reserves, of this attrition, of this, say, larger maneuvering, etc., is not present. There is no complexity in there, except in Austerlitz you find that the Austrians simply attack this camp just straight ahead, just infantry, cavalry thrown into this thing. And then Napoleon from his ridge orders a line of infantry that was hidden beneath, underneath in a trench, right, to jump out, right, with a surprise, and attack these guys on the flank. And then they send in cavalry, and of course this completely unaware Austrian army is completely broken. They rout completely, and while they're routing, Napoleon uncovers the artillery as if artillery had not been used normally in a battle, like with all the arms fully displayed, or at least even if hidden, like because we talk in this battlefields the reasons of maneuvering, right? Like in actual Austerlitz, you had French troops that were keeping to arrive from other locations because, of course, the Allies had already recognized like French positions, and more or less, of course, Napoleon did carry out a trap there. He rearranged troops in particular ways. The enemy was not entirely sure about the French positions, but none of this sort of tactical concentration that would make all these troops crammed together and the battle being solved in 5 minutes, because these guys do not have a formation, do not have reserves, do not have much larger amounts of men at once that are displayed in the battle. And of course, artillery begins to fire and destroys the ice, and so these guys all drown, and nobody knows how, because artillery would say, yes, of course they would fall in the ice, but artillery, and just then they would discover, by the way, there was ice under them, right, and water underneath. You even find scenes in which there is a standard bearer that on horseback that is fleeing, like at the opposite end of the whole group that is routing, and that artillery is targeting precisely and trying to knock out, like with all that artillery just shooting at him for some reason. And of course, artillery had none of that role, right? Just think that counter battery fire was considered useless because it was practically, it wouldn't make the actual damage precisely to destroy the same batteries. It was better to sort of disorder, even just mentally, rather than physically killing the order of the enemy infantry, especially with ricochet fire. So literally, even not shooting on the troops, but making the cannonball falling short, so that the guys in the front line that were the ones that were followed by the rest of the file would literally see the ball arriving, and they would sort of freak out and move, and so disorder the entire file beneath them. It doesn't matter whether the ball even killed them or not. So it's a terrible rendition, of course, of the Battle of Austerlitz, and it's also sort of like, why are these people so dumb to behave like this, not to even check the terrain, or thinking that it could be an ambush or whatever? Why don't they use more complex formations? Why don't they have an apparent order? Nobody knows. Waterloo is also, there is the scene of Borodino. Basically you see a frontal cavalry charge against the infantry. I mean, it's not that sort of absurd conceptually, but the way the battle is portrayed is just cavalry, that notoriously was not decisive against infantry in Napoleonic times anymore, unless the infantry was in fact softened up adequately in other ways. It's just this frontal charge, and of course the battle is not shown, but of course Borodino was pretty bloody, as you know. The Russians resisted in an atrocious way. The French lost tens of thousands of men, and the idea there is that it's not even shown. It's just a random scene that you have to understand from just the description that it's Borodino, and nobody told you, by the way, what was going on anyway. So it's terrifying, right? There is no Battle of the Nations in Leipzig. There is no Jena-Auerstaedt. There is no, in fact, the Prussians are too redundant, let's say. They're just another type of German. We already have the Austrians. We're like, well, why do we have to represent anyone else there? In fact, even in Waterloo, they're just showed at a distance. Again, they didn't even buy the uniforms. They didn't show Blücher. They didn't show anything. And it's terrifying. And also Waterloo is represented with very few depth of Like at that point, you should imagine the greatest amount of CGI showing so many troops at a time. No, right? There were literally more actual human actors in the 1970 movie, of course, but to an enormous extent. They even called sort of the Red Army reservists to do that with this international movie making. Waterloo is just, there's CGI, but it's just very contained even with that, right? When you think about Gladiator, I don't know how many, in the initial battle, how many actual people there were, but Scott made like with CGI, etc., a great work, because it made you feel that this was at least like thousands of people, right? And it was brilliant to make. It's also Braveheart. Braveheart was done in the same way. I don't know how many actual actors there were, but they simply replicated that with also much more primitive CGI at the time, and you do not even realize that it's CGI, right? Here you have ultra-advanced CGI, you even have hundreds of soldiers on the field, and you do not actually exploit that to show something more comprehensive. Like when the French advance uphill, aside from the fact that there is this very weird thing of British infantry advancing and then forming square like 5 seconds before cavalry was charging into them, which, as you know, it's not how it happened. In the 1970 movie, actually, that it's sort of way more accurate. The squares, we'll say that those units were behind or uphill, like the French couldn't see it before they got there. Of course, there is no other further complexity. There is no Hougoumont, there is no other sort of cavalry charge, counter cavalry charge. Zero. There is a bit of artillery pounding of British positions at the beginning, but it's all very lame, right? Again, it doesn't give you any sense of solemnity. Like, I think the reason why we all liked the initial battle in Gladiator is that it gave you the sense of being there, right? It was properly designed to make you feel like, yes, this is a terribly inaccurate historical scene, but it sort of made you feel the tension, made you see the Roman positions, the barbarians emerging from the forest. Yes, it's all ridiculous in a way. The cavalry charging through the forest with Maximus saying to stick together, yes, so they could smash better into the trees. Like, of course, that is completely ridiculous, together with lots of other things. But it made you feel it was there, and it was a big thing, right? When the Romans start bombarding with artillery, the Germans, it's like, that's understandably very hyping sort of move. Today you watch that, you say, well, okay, yes, it's not this too much, right? You meant up, you can't control your emotions, you're not a teenager or a kid. But from this movie here, you can't get any of that, because simply there is none of that. It doesn't make you feel these soldiers are passive. They stay there, they get bombarded by artillery, they just crouch down, and they're not even giving that sense. Even in the Patriot, hell, it was just 40 years before in time, you have the beautiful sense of linear tactics, right? These guys standing in front of artillery, musketry fire, not moving, because they were properly trained to do that. Here it's just an incredibly lame thing, in which eventually Napoleon, basically this is what happened. I don't know if you have an idea of the extension of the battlefield of Waterloo, but here it looks like the French were attacking uphill, the British, just with bayonets fixed and just running from the beginning, just like in Austerlitz, by the way, against the enemy, and without maintaining alignment whatsoever. And then eventually the lines meet and they start just beating each other without basically any shooting. They just are stabbing, punching, whatever, and there's no discernible order or unit or whatever. It's just terrifying, right? So yes, it's that bad. Historically, tactically, again, what I think it's the most... There are some details that make it even more ridiculous, because at the beginning of Waterloo, there is Wellington literally next to a sniper with a telescopic, visor that says literally this: "Look, I have spotted Napoleon. Do I kill him?" you know, aside from the fact that you don't know if you have an idea, of course, of the distances, the fact that Napoleon was behind his own lines, everything was done in relative safety, of course. Cannonballs could fly here and there, but generally speaking, again, the chance to be hit were minimal compared to what was the carnage that occurred in the, in the musketry fire and cavalry charges and all this stuff. But the that were also, by the way, normally it's just when you pursue the enemy that you kill, but consider that it was musketry fire that killed more than white steel, right? Statistically, like cannonballs were literally the least important thing. But of course, there was not such a thing like a sniper rifle that could shoot Napoleon across the armies. And Wellington says no, because says we do not this because we are he says something like we are in the line of, we are in civilized warfare, we do not kill officers, generals among each other because it's dumb. And this is the ridiculous thing. Secondly, there is still there a scene in which just the regular line infantry starts shooting at the French as soon as they start advancing. That is literally, it was across a very wide space. Of course, had nothing of the useful range of musketry. It's just that bad and ridiculous. And plus, Napoleon joins the fight. Right, basically when they tell him that the Prussians had arrived, he goes out there and carries out personally a cavalry charge. After having briefly sort of passed in front of the units, like imagine the numbers that were present at Waterloo, and this guy passing in front of 15 guys saying, "For France, we will never surrender," like in this way. And then he charges, and the weird thing, by the way, is not just this, if it wasn't enough, but that the same sniper of the previous scene actually shoots him through the famous Napoleonic hat. So killing it before was no, because Wellington said no, but now, things got more heated, so you should try to get a headshot. It's beyond ridiculous. The Prussians arrive, and you can only see them from the distance. Blücher was not a military genius. There's all a story behind that, but at least in the 1970 movie, you have that minimal consideration for the Prussians and this terrible sort of German bloodthirsty behavior, and the militaristic Prussian sort of vendetta-style mode. Kill them all or something like that. And here you do not get that. Right? You get Napoleon escapes from the battlefield. There is no sense of him trying to rally the troops. There is no such reference to the old guard. I mean, do you realize how lame this thing is? Like, it terrifying. So really scenes that you would like to forget, for how, like, you see, I will give them that. If you watch the movie, now I'm getting into the historical things, I'm getting nastier, but if you watch the movie, you just stay there, you get bored, you see these guys, a bit of action, a bit of explosions, a bit of, bit of killed people, a bit of beating, a bit of horses. There's a nice scene before Waterloo in which you see a guy passing on gallop from a horse to another. Nice stunt, but let's say, what the hell does this have to do with anything? Why should I be watching that instead of just what you could see in 1970 without CGI? Nobody really understands the sense of the lameness of this movie choices, right? You could, it comes into my mind, how could have they done that, right? It's a challenge, but at that point, I think I would have made much shorter segments about many other battles that would have cost enormously, but still at least would have given an idea of what Napoleonic warfare really was. I mean, Murat cavalry charge at Eylau. Wouldn't you like simply to see that at some point? Like, there are some iconic moments in Napoleonic history and warfare that you can't sort of miss, right? There are other weird things we will see now, but it's again, I can't express how bad, militarily speaking, this thing really is. What can I say? I will surely think it's something else. The same siege of Toulon, when Napoleon storms the enemy fortress, you know that the entire deal of the siege of Toulon is how gradually, and in spite of the lack of resources, Napoleon managed to attrition the enemy and managed to eventually attack in the breaches that were created. Here, basically, the siege of Toulon is showed like Napoleon, yes, salvages some, old artillery, he recasts it, etc., but there's not much of a artillery exchange. Yes, let's talk artillery, because the movie is actually showing a lot of that, but it doesn't quite get it. Basically, Napoleon storms the fortress of Toulon, simply arriving at night while the British are singing with ladders and storming the fortress. And in like 5 minutes, destroying the entire enemy ships in the harbor. Yeah, totally like it would happen. And why didn't they do it in any other night? Right, provided that the siege of Toulon was a pretty serious thing, right? Together with the front in Brittany and the one in the northeast was, if even one had fallen, France was lost. You see this guy just arriving with ladders and storming it in 5 minutes, and problem solved, right? I understand it's a movie, but I don't know, why don't you show how Napoleon applies his artillerist skills in that specific context, and how attritions the enemy, how he wins this battle of minds, if you want, of morale, and how he threw himself in the breach. He does participate to the fight also in the movie. On that occasion, he historically got cut. One of his ties cut. It would have been nice to show that, the brutality of the hand-to-hand combat in a more sort of confrontational, sort of not just random people scattered like in the Hollywood melee, but sort of this bodily like group that arrives to face another. It's a clash of wills, and bloodshed ensues on the basis of this terrifying situation and attrition that was going on forever and consuming both of them. Other situations are ridiculous, like at that short range, like, I don't know, maximum 100 meters, Napoleon's horse, it gets hit by a pretty large caliber. It was something like at least, multiple inches large, and literally the bullet remains within the horse. That horse would have been destroyed like it showed, but let's say that the ball would have passed through, right? That's the other thing. Artillery is shown prominently in the movie because they made the association, well, yes, Napoleon began as an artillerist, he was quite skilled in that, and so they always make the scene, especially in the trailer, it's annoying that every time he is commanding, he's always, for some reason, just 1 meter away from the battery, firing, and giving the signal, covering his ears, and not just like with his, staff somewhere high or more, even just glorious to represent. It seems like this just an average artillerist guy is still fixated with this, and this artillery resolves every situation, and it's not quite the thing either. What else with artillery that was weird? Well, many of this kind of stuff, at least it's to know. The other weird thing is that, for example, yes, there's the scene with Maria Louise of Austria. Was basically like a teenager who seems to be so thrilled to wanting to fuck with Napoleon. It's literally showed in these terms. because there is all the drama of the divorce from Josephine because the lack of hair, etc. And so Marie-Louise was, first of all, very different. She was very the typical Austrian sort of, even cold and very ethereal figure. There was all this fear towards Napoleon. Instead, she arrives like a stupid kid who wants to just immediately have sex. First of all, that's not even how they met, but again, it's so full of, say, actual mistakes and made-up things in this movie that it's useless even to digress in. Napoleon historically literally went to literally storm her carriage before she arrived, and she picked her up and started to kiss her and so on. And the story was, of course, that Napoleon was an ogre, a monster, especially from an Habsburgic perspective, after all what had happened. And she's not showed again in the entire movie, which is bad because when you read Napoleon's letter from St. Helena, you see he says things like, "I want Marie-Louise to have my heart after I'm dead. I'll send her to all this kind of stuff." So he thought of Josephine immediately, but there is the entire part of Marie-Louise being his wife at that point, and also the King of Rome, the son that they generated, that is shown when he's born, and he was expecting that scene, by the way, Napoleon to just show it to the crowd, like in many other representations, artistic renditions, cinematographically of Napoleon's event. And instead, this son disappears from the entire movie. Nobody mentions it. It's not a thing. You have all this, ball breaking about, the fact that Napoleon could not have a hair that separates from Josephine, etc. The entire story. He has a son, and then nobody gives a fuck about him throughout the entire movie. It's terrifying. It's beyond terrifying. Like, you don't see any change in Napoleon as a father, as a nothing, right? There is all this anxiety for him to have a hair because it's just pertinent to the love story with Josephine that, as we've seen, lays under the entire movie. But any other consideration lacks, right? The only weird thing that could have a minimal feministic implication, but again, I thank the movie for not fitting on that at all, is that basically when Napoleon comes back from Egypt, he was depressed over... He had been depressed. I explained it in my video about Napoleon invasion of Egypt. It's really true. He was depressed over Josephine's betrayal. So in the movie they show him coming back to France and her not even staying home because she was with her lover, etc. And he forces her to, when she comes back, not to throw her out, to say that he was the most important thing in the world. He acts very pathetically because he wants to be recognized as the single most important thing for her, and she says yes, yes. And you think that maybe this, also from the trailer, was the seed of eventually Josephine hating this guy and the situation falling apart. Absolutely not. After in the movie they kind of like each other. And Josephine in there forces him, when they are alone, to say that he is nothing without her. And so it's reciprocal. It's not that she's being, the daisy walking with her shoes over the man. It's not a feministic thing. It's just like and I like it in that sense. It was like a sort of parody. Even though it's pathetic, I don't like the concept of equality in that, but you understand it in the context of the two characters in the movie. And it's somehow nice. And then Napoleon talks to her about his lovers, and she said, because it was normal at the time, also Napoleon notoriously had lots of affairs, even an illegitimate son that is actually showed in the conception but in an absolutely false way that I'm not going to digress on because it's too ridiculous to be. That may be the single most ridiculous thing of the movie, and it wants to be a bit ridiculous / comedy when in some parts of the Napoleon-Josephine relationship. So what you see in the trailer when Josephine says you're just a tiny little brute and nothing else, it's not a theme that is resumed throughout the movie. And so Napoleon doesn't quite look like that in the movie. It's just rings for the trailer. It's just captivating. People maybe want to watch what the thing got down to. It would have been also historically correct because of how Napoleon rose to power thanks to the political connection of Josephine. That's absolutely 100% correct. But that's not where the movie leads in that context. So, is there any scene that I like more than else than one, or I think that it's good? Well, I must say, again, it's a very let's say it's a bit of I expected more grandeur scenographically, right? But some scenes that are meant to be relatively epic, I think for a movie in general, were not too bad. For example, Napoleon's crowning, imperial crowning. It's not that I wouldn't say this is a good rendition per se or something that fascinated me, but there is some in the tone of the movie that makes it highlight. I think a good-looking scene is when Napoleon enters the Kremlin fortress in Moscow. That's not a bad scene, right? It looks powerful enough. I mean, the fact that the Russians had fled, that there's this big sort of scenario with typical Russian architecture, cupolas, etc., the Kremlin, etc., and there is no one there. And it's also one of, I think, the most famous scene from the poster of Napoleon, when he's on horseback and looks somewhere away. You find some buildings there. It's the Kremlin. But just to make you understand how bad that is, basically in sequence there is that scene. Then he sits on Alexander's throne, and then next scene he's in bed. He wakes up, he opens the shutters, and Moscow is on fire at night. So he goes down like in his night gown, and there are the generals who say, well, look, they burned it down, the citizens themselves, and Napoleon makes, okay, so let's go to St. Petersburg and let's do the same. And the general makes, but now it's too late, it's too cold, it's better if we go back to Poland. And Napoleon sort of has a sort of breakdown. In the next scene, well, no, actually in the next scene there is a minimal of the retreat from Russia, just with some French, dying there in the cold, but it's just like a scene with 3 guys, literally. And immediately after that, skipping 1 year and a quarter of that story, including between the rebellion of Central Europe, the Battle of the Nations, all this mess, you just find Napoleon that signs abdication, doesn't tell you that he had attempted suicide, nothing, and he's sent to Elba. Right? It's that speedy. It's just doesn't tell you anything. It's that terrifying in this way of storytelling. If you know all what happened in between, that even at least deemed irrelevant according to this production. There are really, again, many bad things I can't. Here I can resume the video. I can watch some scenes that are a bit like, even the diplomatic talks are really very lame, very simple. Talleyrand appears just a couple of times, especially at the beginning. The rest is all talk, sort of. About the end, there's nothing very specific, really. Just a bunch of scenes with kids, once on board of a British ship, because they were all looking to him because they were amazed by his grandeur. Then he stays in St. Helena, and it lasts like 2 minutes. Like, it doesn't really give you any further satisfaction. Some scenes are nice. Again, if you look at the entire photography, the costumes, etc., you do feel a bit like, okay, yes, this is a historical setting. It's not, say, considering the average history movie, it's not poorly done. All right, it's okay. But the entire mechanism, the entire context is terrifying. There's that scene of Russian resistance before they arrive to Moscow that shows this Russian guys just wearing, I don't know what sort of strange fur, like using mortars to ambush the French, and then some top marshal entering the forest being almost killed by this bunch of guys. I mean, the paucity even of the operational, the tactical situation, it's so self-evident. You don't buy that. There was no effort to depict this. In fact, I'm realizing just right now, I should find the scene on Austerlitz, here it is, that there are actually no Prussian or Russian uniforms displayed, or soldiers displayed, really. Yeah, I realize it just right now, I'm sure about this. Just the Austrian ones, and the British ones, of course, but the rest, it's really oblivious. Yeah. So yes, I can't say I like this movie. I think it's boring, yes. I think it's relatively shallow, but if you are able to look past, if you're able to evaluate it, not for the hype that you may have had for a Ridley Scott direction, it's just a love story. That's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a historical documentary. It's not supposed to be, in that sense, even nearly as historical as you would expect. Because I get it. At the beginning you say, oh my god, Ridley Scott makes Napoleon, so it must be like Gladiator. Let it be like Gladiator, the same hype, the same coolness. None of that. The guy doesn't get it. The guy demonstrated not to know anything about Napoleonic history, and to be also sort of contemptuous towards historical accuracy. So just let him, do whatever. But in this sense, let's reflect on what has brought to this historical. This is not just this guy being 85, having been in his prime in other times of his existence, etc. It's literally about us, right? Let's not blame specifically this guy. I mean, I know that there is on YouTube sort of a huge hype for Napoleonic stuff, because let's say that objectively, when we speak strategy, the easiest way to teach it in many ways is Napoleonic warfare, right? Even before Rome, before World War II or whatever, the actual concept of even lead soldiers, reconstructionism, strategic thinking revolves around Napoleon, right? And so you can find actually an enormous stuff based on Chandler's work, looking at step by step with, again, the boxes moving on the map, what these battles were about. Those, I think, are minimally educational if you're able to understand what was moving those boxes and why the let's say what was especially the strategic background of that, which is usually what I think those documentaries do not explain particularly well. They just want to make you think that it's the battle that actually matters in a dynamic sense, because most people are attracted to that, right? I found reviews here on YouTube about the saying Napoleon, basically saying things like, I don't know, the battle scenes were actually good, or I sort of liked them. I was so impressed because now I think that thanks to the artillery depicted here, it was as violent as World War II. You have all these sort of strange takes by, of course, people that legitimately do not care anything about historical accuracy, military historical accuracy specifically. But the the sense, in fact, is exactly this, that most people seem to be connected with this Napoleonic history stuff, not because they care about the ultimate meaning politically or traditionally of what that era really was and how different countries were involved comprehensively. They only care about, say, their own country, right? The Napoleonic era is a close enough time to identify some sort of, countries of today in some ways, and saying, oh, well, look at what my country did. And I realize it because it happens on my own video, that you understand that there are some people that are more or less obsessed, always at a certain age, with their own country. They just look at those videos talking about their country. They say something extremely dumb in the comments, and then they disappear after they have commented on 10 of them. And you understand that they probably got bored at the actual explanation of how, of course, their country was part of a much bigger picture. And also that it's not that if you talk about a country historically, it's because you're sort of flattering the people who come from that country. You just are trying to explain what happened in history. Of course, if there is some merit or demerit, you have to point it out. But you understand that in the back of their head, they're always trying to search for sympathies, for somebody talking positively about their country, and so to rise their rather poor self-esteem. And you understand that the personal, moral, and cultural tragedy of these individuals, but this is pretty much the average, right? We all also correspond to that to some extent. And so maybe, of course, the broader audience for this movie was just a more generally Ridley Scott familiar watcher, sort of, especially for other great movies in the past, and was just expecting the equivalent of the hype watching those movies, because it's Napoleon and it's because Scott, right? And instead, of course, it has nothing to do with that. It's a miserable failure in that sense of artistic depiction. It's just a movie that you can watch out of curiosity to see what your times are really getting to. And I think my take from it is this one, is that this movie somehow adapts to what I think the average person has come to be today. Like, they want to see some flat, sort of, just there is Napoleon, so it must be cool, let's watch it, style of idea, right? It's not about the realism. It's not about, say, in fact, the 1970 version, or about Waterloo, or I don't know, pick Gettysburg, pick this very few movies that sort of used all the sort of this masses of men to actually reproduce in part of the actual military sometimes, like in the 1970s one, that are orderly, marching, discipline, not completely, like it's not really how it was, and that's what I always say. If you are actually interested in historical accuracy, watching a movie is an insult to your own intelligence, right? You can't, of course, try to check whether that movie has any of it, but not because movies are the place where you should try to find historical accuracy to learn history from. There is only history books, and your brain to work pretty damn hard, right? It doesn't matter how many movies you have seen, not even how many books you have read. You must study things. You must repeat them. You must sort of learn to teach them as well in order to understand them deeply. The rest is just sort of nothing. And I don't remember, even when's the last time that I watched a movie that I thoroughly liked, in a sense that this is a big, powerful movie. To me, in fact, movies have died in the early 2000s, right? Including looking at movies like, I don't know, Gladiator, in fact, or Black Hawk Down, etc. Even though, again, they were not particularly accurate, nor historically nor militarily in many ways, but it sort of gave you an idea. Like, there are movies that you may want to watch today because they were about what they made you feel successfully. And these movies here do not make you feel anything, because it's as if those for whom they are designed for really do not care themselves more than much. Like even on YouTube now, you can have this wave of sort of angry reviews on Napoleon because it sucked. But at the end of the day, what are you angry for? Like, didn't you know that movies are like this today? Didn't you know that, it's just not where you have to search. Like, I've said it many times, that one of my greatest dreams, like one of the things I would have liked to do was actually to shoot a movie, like a director. Like, of course, I don't have the palest idea of how to do it, but let's say I have a very visual imagination. Since I was a child, I also drew very much about. I wrote thousands of pages of comics when I was a teenager, early teenager, about the similar warfare stuff. I was very influenced by that aforementioned Napoleon TV show from the early 2000s, and I don't know, I have a completely different idea in mind of what is entertaining, right? And of course, I would, as a historian, then be particularly picky about historical accuracy to some extent, but I also understand that you cannot think that what you're representing is what it actually looks like in real life, right? It's just like, again, Stone's Alexander's charge at Gaugamela. It's an insult to the dignity of the average human intelligence, right? It's basically even worse than the cavalry charge in the woods in Gladiator. Especially because that say Alexander had some sort of greater military historical ambitions, right, to represent. But it was just a movie, and so nobody even about that should be that angry. But people keep watching movies because they think that, I don't know, somebody's going to restore them their lost youth or childhood with feelings that cannot come back anymore because we do not live in the same era. Start caring for history, start caring for identity, start caring for tradition, start caring for religion. And you will see that movies will also start being something, right? This is just nonsense, right? People are still divided over whether, again, Napoleon was or wasn't Hitler. That's the basic level of debate that normally I listen. If you check any of these movie reviews, right? Of course, on my channel, like, I have better, like, consider yourself, for highly selected, just for the interest that you yourself display towards my content for precise reason. But go on any other YouTube channel's movie review and not just notice how nobody talks about these things, but let's say how more superficial the attitude is, and in the comment, especially, see how many people start to complain about, this is how the British saw Napoleon, and Napoleon was actually a great reformer, and it stops to those slogans, and nobody talks about the actual history, or at least there are some scattered references to actual facts, but there's no deeper sort of appreciation of the era or sort of background you can sensibly grasp from the broader mass, and people go back to sleep. That's it, right? I don't know, maybe YouTube is not the right place to discuss this stuff, but also a movie like Napoleon is probably worth just YouTube commentaries at that point, because in many ways it's not much of a great movie. It's just a movie you can't even truly. I wanted to see the positive of it. I wanted to see the positive as a story, like, because people are angry and aggressive and violent for no reason, because they are cultic and sort of emotional, and so they feel betrayed by their idol that didn't make the movie that they thought it was. But look at the movie for what it is, basically, and realize that, it's a story. After all, I mean, it has some good views, some good scenes, say visually. Then it's basically like this. Here I see other. I don't know. I don't even care about what Scott says actually about this movie. It's not what this video is even supposed to be, because I know he's been talking about the stuff, and he's elusive, evasive. He doesn't actually answer questions. He's a sort of jerk, but that's the point, right? After all, well, this is the work of many more people than just him, but of course he bears quite some responsibility overall. Now, what to say about the whole picture? Study Napoleonic history, right? Not just warfare, by the way, because you can't quite understand warfare if you don't understand politics, and not the one that you wish that era was about, but the actual thing, on actual history books, not on Wikipedia or wherever. But say, even from there, start from something that can lead you to legitimate literature. Don't think that somebody's going to entertain you. First of all, there are so many great movies of any kind, so you don't need actually to spend money to watch this stuff. I have my ways to watch things, by the way. Wink, wink. But you know, it's not a matter of not spending money. It's just that I don't consider this worth it. I think it's just the product of a decadent, morally decadent society, nothing else, right? And nobody in the world has actually anything better to offer. I don't know if you noticed this. It's like, it's not that we come up with, I don't know, terrific Indian or Brazilian movies that show, I don't know, some historical, you know, this is actually the best that you get globally, right? So just consider what we can, where we really stand, unfortunately, right? So I understand that learning legitimate history is somehow boring to some extent, but it's also a way you can, in fact, improve the world, paradoxically, among the various things, also to see better movies being made. All right, I think that there's surely going to be better movies to tell you something. I don't know about you. I'm a pretty sentimental person. To me, the thing that matters the most is how I feel. And of course, for which purpose, for which inspiration, etc. And movies are really important to me, so that's why I care also about these reviews, because you can have a sort of guide. I understand that. Like, if you follow me for my historical comment, you're hoping that what I'm saying here is relevant, at least to interpret this movie. And so we all like drama, we all like people who criticize others and so on. So that's where you expect, let me hear now what Schwerpunkt says about the topic, so that I feel more comforted, I feel better about myself, because I have the certified judgment, right, from a historian, whatever. I watch this stuff like, again, a regular person, so that's why I am telling you what I felt about this movie. And again, all in all, I don't understand the hatred. I don't see. It's not that this movie makes a statement against Napoleon, as some people wanna tell. I found people the most different. I don't know even what nationalities, but basically saying that this was a British anti-French thing, but this person was a leftist and was saying, but Napoleon, let's remember that Napoleon was a dictator, so it was bad, because Napoleon is dictator, so any other dictator is a dictator, and it's bad, you know? So that's the kind of reasoning, and, but, you know, Kirby was great because it's a woman, right? So, you know, she's great. I actually didn't know her before that, also because I don't watch movies very much. She was doing very well, I have no doubt. Phoenix is also one of my favorite actors. I don't know. I don't think he fits much Napoleon's character. I think he plays a bit, not himself, but he'd say this Napoleon looks a bit like his own character, a bit sort of this chthonic, introverted, sensitive, sort of, and magnetic individual. There is some charisma from him. I disagree with those who just think that this is a pathetic rendition of Napoleon. Right? Maybe there is the sense that every in fact, a great leader has to be a sort of egomaniacal idiot or some sort that has to be so terrible and tyrannic, which is, however, a very, in fact, actually, common portrayal that we make out of Napoleon. A bit the sense of the tyrant is a problem in the Anglosphere, right? And yet, even though this is a movie from the Anglosphere, I don't see that, right? I don't see a hatred against the French. I don't see this as, a clumsy portrayal of the French. Maybe in the last battle, you see, I don't know, like a pretty dumb way of fighting. So, but it's not implicit that this was also the British, the pretty stupid thing in Waterloo. It's just the direction that is bad, right? And again, yes, it's displeasant. You don't see marshals. You don't have an idea of the complexity of command. You do not see the moral forces intervening. It just revolves around Napoleon. You do not know what happens to France afterwards or how they had come to that point. There is no greater intro like that. Maybe it's not necessary. They could just make the movie better, because the sense is that more or less anyone knows, at least up to a certain time ago, everybody knew more or less what Napoleon did by general education. So maybe that's not so necessary. It's just like in Oliver Stone's Alexander, you have all these scenes because you're sort of supposed to know Alexander's story already, right? So definitely this was a very different narration from Gladiator that instead focused on the story that was quite complex and sort of made sense to some extent. This one is just, again, they had to cut because also the way they make this movie is normal, and this is typical of Scott, by the way. It's just like with Kingdom of Heaven and others. You understand that they shoot, I don't know, 6 hours and then they make the movie out of 2 hours and a half. That's normal. That's how movies are made on a regular basis. But you understand the way Scott patches things together. It's this sort of strange flow of things that give you more or less the impression of an era, right? This is how also he phrased, he termed the inaccuracies of, I don't know, Gladiator historically, or it was not about real history. It was but giving an idea of what Rome was at the time, how he felt it, and it came out pretty well, even though, again, it's debatable in many ways, but at least artistically, it was very powerful. It made you feel something. This one doesn't make you feel much. It makes you feel, again, the only thing it makes you feel is for the relationship that is not a bad one at the end of the day. When Josephine dies and Napoleon is really overwhelmed by this, like, you don't see, it makes sense, right? That's something you would see as real, and you wouldn't be that troubled by that. What's wrong with that storytelling? And so I have here the movie in front of me. Probably will delete it now because I have enough hard disk volume, but yeah, there's scenes of the coup of other. There is no detail, even of the French army in general. You see, there is no true interest in depicting that, but that's pretty much it. In the fights, again, nothing of the hype or the sort of the sense of waiting for the battle. There is a bit of that in Austerlitz, because definitely the scene of Austerlitz is the closest you get to Gladiator's first battle, and you get that considering that there is a sort of waiting for that. See guys that are preparing for battle, all this stuff, but absolutely not in with the hype of Gladiator. Some scenes with Napoleon here running in the woods. Remember the one of Germania in Gladiator. You have the sort of preparing for the ambush style kind of surprise things. But again, in actual fact, it gets pretty lame. It doesn't really take you anywhere. I think the preparation for the battle lasts more than the actual battle. Well, okay, also in Gladiator, but considering the complexity and the length of Austerlitz, that's quite a very different thing, right? So forget to see military relevant things looking at this. Beautiful, maybe some horses running, they really, you get to appreciate these things. Horses are beautiful, but, that's basically the most entertaining aspect you see in the whole movie, I would say. And that's pretty much it. So, I guess, stop it for now. Here, the scene of the Kremlin. Yes. That's not bad. That's the only scene that you say, well, wow, this is a good idea. Like, I would have not actually made it like that. I would have made it, because it doesn't look too much like the Kremlin, as a matter of fact, but the sense of Napoleon entering there, and conceptually, right, aside from what happened historically, like, it is a scene you may want to sort of appreciate. And I really don't talk about the exile, because there isn't much to say, really. It's a very short scene, the last few minutes. Just talks from the girls of the local nobleman that was watching over him, and that's pretty much it. That's it, right? So, let me know if you have any sort of interest, question, opinion, whatever, as usual. However, for today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.